The pyramids began to hum at 3:47 a.m., not just in Egypt, in Bosnia, under the Antarctic ice, on the ocean floor off Japan. Structures we had mapped but never understood suddenly vibrated at the same impossible frequency. And then the lights came on. Every ancient stone monument on Earth ignited with symbols that hadn't been seen in 12,000 years. Humanity had exactly 14 minutes to wonder why, because that's when the first Armada ships crossed the orbit of Neptune. Dr. Elena Vasquez hadn't slept in 31 hours. Her observatory in Chile was supposed to track asteroids, not alien invasions, but there they were on her screen. 7,000 vessels, each one the size of Manhattan. They moved in perfect geometric formation, like a living equation solving itself across the void. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. It had gone cold hours ago. She drank it anyway. Cold coffee was the least of Earth's problems now. The message came through on every frequency simultaneously. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. 48 hours. The aliens didn't explain what would happen when it reached zero. They didn't need to. The formation of their fleet said everything. Elena recognized the pattern immediately. It was a siege configuration. She'd seen it in military history books. Surround, isolate. Wait, these beings had conquered before, perhaps many times. Marcus Chen stood inside the Great Pyramid, surrounded by symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. He was a linguist, not an archaeologist, but linguistics didn't matter anymore. These symbols weren't a language anyone had spoken in millennia, yet somehow he understood fragments. Old words, familiar words, words that felt like memories he'd never lived. His grandmother had told him stories about ancestors who watched the stars. He'd always thought they were myths. Now the myths were waking up. Elena patched through to the International Space Station. Commander Yuki Tanaka's voice crackled with static. From orbit, she could see something Elena's instruments couldn't. The ancient structures weren't just glowing on Earth. They were glowing everywhere. On the Moon, on Mars, on moons of Jupiter they'd never explored. Humanity had walked past these ruins for decades, calling them geological anomalies. They weren't anomalies. They were waiting. And whatever they were waiting for, it had finally arrived. 40 hours remained when the Martian structure activated fully. It rose from the red dust like a forgotten god, stretching after an eternal sleep. 6 kilometers tall, perfectly geometric, broadcasting a signal directly at the Armada. The alien fleet stopped advancing. For 3 hours, nothing moved. Then they changed formation. Still a siege. But now they were facing outward too, as if they suddenly weren't sure they were the only hunters in this system. Marcus discovered the first readable passage at hour 36. It spoke of guardians, builders who seeded the cosmos with markers long before any current species evolved. The markers weren't weapons, they weren't shields, they were something far stranger. They were witnesses, designed to record, to remember, to testify. And if one species tried to destroy another completely, the markers would ensure the universe never forgot. The invaders would be remembered forever, as monsters. Elena connected the dots with trembling fingers. The Armada had conquered hundreds of worlds. That much was clear from their formation, their confidence, their cold countdown. But none of those worlds had markers. None of those worlds had guardians watching. Earth was different. Earth had been chosen for preservation, not because humanity was special, but because someone, long ago, had decided this corner of the cosmos deserved a chance to grow. The Armada hadn't expected witnesses. Commander Tanaka watched the lunar structure unfold. Panels extended like metal petals, catching sunlight and converting it into something her instruments couldn't identify. The energy wasn't threatening. It felt almost ceremonial, like a court preparing to hold session. She realized with growing awe that she was witnessing cosmic bureaucracy. The Armada had come to conquer, but they'd stumbled into a courtroom that had been waiting 12,000 years to convene, and humanity was about to testify. 24 hours remained. The Armada sent a new message. This time it contained questions. They wanted to know who built the structures, how long humans had possessed this technology, what weapons were hidden inside. Elena almost laughed. They thought humanity controlled these ancient machines. They thought we were a threat. We were farmers who had inherited a castle without knowing it had walls. But maybe that mistake could buy us time. Maybe it could buy us everything. Marcus found the activation sequence buried in the symbols. It wasn't complex. It was almost insultingly simple. A single question, asked sincerely, would complete the circuit. The markers wanted to know one thing about any species they protected. What do you hope to become? Not what you are. Not what you've done. What you aspire toward. The builders understood something profound about consciousness. Hope reveals more than history ever could, and hope cannot be faked. Elena coordinated with teams across the globe. Every ancient site reported the same phenomenon. The structures were listening, waiting. They needed humanity's answer before they could fully activate. Scientists debated, politicians argued, religious leaders prayed. Everyone had a different vision of what humanity hoped to become. But as the hours ticked away, something unexpected happened. The arguments stopped, because deep down, beneath all the differences, the answer was simpler than anyone expected. 12 hours remained when humanity spoke, not through governments, not through leaders, through ordinary people standing at every ancient site, speaking the same truth in 1,000 different languages. We hope to understand. That was it. Not conquest, not dominion, not survival at any cost. Understanding of the universe, of each other, of ourselves. The structures heard, and for the first time in 12 millennia, the Guardians judged their wards worthy of protection. The solar system transformed, every structure connected in a web of golden light. From Mercury to the Kuiper Belt, the markers spoke to each other across the void. They were compiling, recording. The Armada's entire history flowed into the network. Every world they'd conquered, every species they'd silenced, every civilization erased from existence. None of it was lost. The Guardians had been watching the Armada too, and their testimony was far less hopeful than humanity's. 6 hours remained when the Armada received the verdict. It came as data streams they couldn't block, transmitted to every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. The markers showed what the Armada truly was. Conquerors who had chosen destruction over coexistence. Empires who had silenced countless voices. The universe now knew their name and their shame. There was no hiding anymore. Every species that had ever feared them now knew the truth. The Armada had been witnessed. Eleanor watched her screens in disbelief. The Armada's formation was fracturing. Ships peeling away from the fleet, not retreating exactly, scattering, like children caught doing something wrong. The countdown stopped at 4 hours and 17 minutes. No explanation, no communication, just silence. And then slowly the fleet began to reverse course. 7,000 vessels turning away from a species that hadn't fired a single shot, that hadn't raised a single weapon. Marcus sat in the Great Pyramid as the symbols dimmed to a gentle pulse. The crisis was over, but something else was beginning. The structures remained active, still watching, still recording. He understood now why the builders had chosen Earth. Not because of our technology, not because of our strength, because we kept asking questions, because we kept hoping. The universe was vast and often cruel, but curiosity was a light that could outlast any darkness. Commander Tanaka floated before the observation window, watching the Armada's last ships disappear into the void. Behind her, the lunar structure had settled into dormancy. But it wasn't sleeping anymore. It was waiting, alert, ready. Humanity had proven something to the cosmos today. Not that we were powerful, not that we were advanced, but that we were worth protecting, that our hopes were genuine. And sometimes that matters more than fleets. Eleanor stepped outside her observatory as dawn broke over the Andes. The sky was clear, the stars were fading into blue. Somewhere out there, the Armada was telling other conquerors what had happened, how a tiny species on a small world had inherited guardians they didn't build and validated their protection with nothing but honesty. Earth would never be seen the same way again. Neither would humanity. They had been tested, and they had answered well. Months later, Marcus published his translation of the marker inscriptions. The final passage haunted readers around the world. It read simply, "We do not protect the strong, we protect those still becoming." Humanity had spent millennia looking at the stars, wondering if they mattered in the cosmic scheme. Now they knew the answer, not because they were the center of anything, but because they never stopped reaching toward what they could be. And in a universe of conquerors, that made them rare, that made them precious, that made them unforgettable.